Khadija, could you tell me again how exactly is it that you pronounce your last name? I don't want to get it wrong.
No, it's okay. It's Khadija Abu Hlega, or yeah,
Okay,
Ab
Abu Halila.
yes.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't want
You're
to get it
welcome.
wrong.
No, it's okay. Trust me. This happened to me a million times in US as well. So in
Thank
front
you.
of like 500 students, so it's totally
Oh,
fine.
wow.
Khamsa, the floor is yours. So,
Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are live. We are back with another session. And this session is particularly close to my heart. It is on the experiences of women leaders. And today we'll be exploring the opportunities and challenges of being an inspiring woman leader, whether that is being an entrepreneur, whether that is being a political figure, whether that is being a professor. We have a lovely panel of women here with us who've been succeeding, who've been uplifting other women, and who've been encouraging them to pursue their passions. So, thank you to our audience for joining us today for this amazing discussion. Listen to them, ask them questions, learn from them, and most importantly, give us the opportunity to hear from you and engage with your perspective. So, thank you for joining us today. Before we move on, we will hear from Ms. Rachel Bukeska, who is the head of the Public Affairs Office in the US Embassy. Ms. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hansa. It is an honor to kick off this timely dialogue. Thank you, Hansa, and all our panelists for participating in tonight's exchange. During the 12 months since last year's International Women's Day, it's been an intense time for women and girls. We've risen to immense heights. In the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris is fast at work in the White House, advancing administration priorities such as stopping climate change and strengthening healthcare, to name a few. She is the first woman, the first Black American, and the first South Asian American to be elected US Vice President. Around the world, more than 20 women are serving as heads of state or government at a momentous period in world history as countries aim to pull ahead of the COVID-19 pandemic and enable recovery. Here in Doha at our embassy, I'm proud to share that our chief of mission and several office directors are women. Our embassy team is also standing up a new internal task force to prioritize gender equality and women's empowerment in our internal and external programming. As the United States conducts foreign policy, the State Department works across 4 key priorities to advance gender equality and the status of women and girls around the world. They are women, peace and security, women's economic empowerment, ending gender-based violence, and adolescent girls. On this year's International Women's Day, we must recognize that it is as much a celebration of women and our achievements as it is an urgent call for action. As I noted earlier, more than 20 women are leading their countries or governments around the world. However, we should question why this number is under 30 when there are more than 190 countries across the globe. The COVID-19 pandemic has also disproportionately impacted women and girls. In the United States, some 2.5 million women have been pushed out of the workforce during this pandemic. Many desperately wish to return to work, but are unable to do so due to various factors, including childcare facilities and schools being closed, forcing them to be at home to support their families. The situation is so dire that Vice President Harris has called it a national emergency. Women around the world are facing this and many other challenges, including rising domestic violence. Therefore, let's let tonight's discussion be a stock-taking of progress and opportunities, but also a sobering reminder of the challenges before us. During this dialogue, throughout Women's History Month and beyond, we must determine what actions we can take to stop the precipitous backsliding in progress for women's equality and empowerment that we are seeing at this time. In closing, I would like to highlight that earlier this week, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, and US Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, honored women from several countries with the 2021 Secretary of State's International Women of Courage Award. This award honors women who have demonstrated exceptional courage, strength, and leadership in acting to improve the lives of others, from families to communities to countries. I encourage you to visit our website and social media platforms to learn more about these extraordinary women. I would also like to recognize an extraordinary woman who inspires me and so many others with her dedicated work ethic, vast intellect, and countless other notable skills, and that is our moderator, Hansa Maria. Hansa, I thank you for all that you do and congratulate you for being identified this week by Cutter Foundation as an inspiring woman. Thank you, everyone, and over to you, Hansa, for this evening's panel discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Rachel, for that introduction. Without further ado, let's hear about our panelists and then give them the opportunity to talk to us, to tell us their ideas, and to engage with us. We have a brilliant lineup here before you today. Our first panelist for today is Dean Susan Karamanian. Dean Karamanian is the Dean of HBKU Law School, amongst her many other accomplishments. Our second panelist for today is Wajiha Yusuf. Wajiha is a medical student at Cornell, and she is also the founder of the first committee in Cornell for human rights and peace. Our third panelist for today is Khatija Abu Halika. Khatija is the vice president for the Youth Advisory Committee for the Minister of Culture and Sports. Our fourth panelist for today is Mariam Althani. Mariam is a junior at Georgetown University and a very passionate women's rights activist. She works as a research assistant with one of her professors and is also a volunteer at a STEM school. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, for engaging with us, and for taking time out of your busy schedules. Before we do anything else, and before we delve into this conversation, let's hear from you about your experiences and why you're doing what you're doing, because you guys are doing amazing things. And for all those women and girls who want to follow in your path and who want to be inspiring leaders just like you, perhaps we can begin by listening to your stories and what encouraged you and what inspired you. So Dean Karamanian, would you like to go first?
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Hansa. And I'd like to thank the United States Embassy in Doha, and particularly Rachel and Asil for inviting me, and also the chance to be with a wonderful panel. I'm the Dean of the College of Law at Hamad bin Khalifa University. Before that, I was in legal education at George Washington Law School for 17 years. But before that, I was a practicing lawyer. And when I was in the 8th grade, I learned about what lawyers do, in effect. And I said I wanted to be a lawyer, but I had never met a lawyer. I just read about what lawyers had done. Yet I knew that a friend of mine, her dad was a lawyer. And so my mother arranged for me one day on a very cold February day in Wisconsin to go meet a lawyer. And it was the general counsel of a major multinational company, Kimberly-Clark. And we got all dressed up at 8 a.m. and I met a lawyer. And I said to myself, I want to become a lawyer. I think part of it was because my father was in the military and we lived a lot of places. And we spent time in the South, going through the South of the United States. And I became very attuned to issues concerning race relations. And having the power of the tool of a lawyer to me was going to be important. So I stuck to my guns and I became a lawyer, and I practiced law for 14 years, but I also had this strong academic side to me. But in the practice, I always devoted substantial time to pro bono, whether it be representing women who were abused, women in child custody matters, women who needed divorce. But also then I started to work in representing inmates on death row in Texas and handling death penalty cases, until finally I left the practice of law to teach, where I can now share my knowledge with the next generation of lawyers.
Thank you for sharing, Dean Karamanian. And we can clearly tell that at the heart of your career and your passion is a commitment to help women in whatever capacity that you possibly can, whether that is by educating the young generation of women who come in your college, or whether that is by being a pro bono lawyer and helping guide them. Um, let's move on to our next panelist, who also helps a lot of women in her capacity. Wajiha, would you like to go next and tell us a little about your journey? How are you becoming, Dr. Wajiha, and how does your passion for women's rights activism fit into this?
First of all, I'd also like to thank you, Kansa, and the embassy for inviting me to speak at this panel. It's a really, really proud moment for me because I've been working on these initiatives for a while now, and to be able to share this with such amazing women, it means a lot to me. So my story also somewhat started when I was younger, and I grew up mostly in the Middle East, and my parents, they gave me a very comfortable life, a very sheltered life, and I wasn't very aware of a lot of the problems that went on in society, and I'm very, very thankful to them for that. But when I was in my final year of high school, I moved to Pakistan, where I'm originally from, to live with my grandparents. And there I experienced a very different kind of life. I experienced a lot of inequities, both in healthcare and society. And I saw that life really wasn't what I had thought it was growing up. And so I became passionate about bridging that gap. And I thought that the best way for me to do so was through medicine. And that was just the start of things. And during my medical training, I came across quite a few patients that were women who had suffered in one way or another because of unequal rights. And I'd seen how a doctor could impact their life. So I'd seen if a doctor heard the patient's concerns and tried to address them and help them, they could really make an impact on their life. And then if they neglected them, that could then turn them away from the healthcare system and turn them away from the only source of help that they had. And when I realized the power that we had to help someone in a very vulnerable position, I decided that's where I wanted the rest of my sort of career trajectory to go.
Thank you for sharing. I mean, as a woman with disability, I have spent a considerable chunk of my time just sitting in doctors' waiting rooms and just going to their offices and trying to find the answers that I wanted. And it's very seldom that you find doctors who are conscious of what essentially might be the feelings of those who are coming to them, and who are conscious of giving their patients the right kind of help and the right kind of support. So I'm really excited that we have you on our panel today. Mariam, would you like to talk to us about your experience?
Sure. First of all, I do want to also thank Khansa and the embassy for inviting me over to talk about my experience. So yeah, just to reiterate everyone's point, really, my like awakening, I want to call it, happened in high school. For a long time, I used to consider myself a third culture kid, even though I am Qatari and I've lived in Qatar my entire life. I think there is a difference, a generational gap, you might call it, between, that of my parents' generation and the generation that I grew up in, which was filled with international students. Like I went to a school with over 45 different nationalities. So I had a lot to kind of consider at a very young age, trying to reconcile my lived experiences, the people around me, the women around me, and that of my friends. And a lot of my inspirations growing up had come from literally listening to women, listening to girls. And so from a very young age, I had to kind of, understand that there is a difference between the society I grew up in and the ones I read in books and the ones I listen to from my colleagues and my classmates. So I kind of knew that there was a disparity. There was kind of friction between, the societies that we grew up in. So when I went to university, I kind of was able to explore that further. And Georgetown kind of allows me the space and the freedom to kind of, create clubs and talk to other women, their experiences, which is what I actually began doing. To reiterate what Jiha's point, which is obviously she's in training to become a doctor, but also through my experience in Georgetown, just talking to other women and listening to them. My friend and I also started a club called the Women's Wellness Society, which basically aims to kind of combat female bias in the medical industry, I guess. Even though don't have a background in medicine, that was something that I felt very passionate about. And seeing as though I'm majoring in culture and politics, I kind of wanted to bridge the gap between politics, culture, and medicine. Currently, obviously, I work in, I don't work, I volunteer at a girls' STEM school. And that's something that I felt very passionate about, seeing as though women were very underrepresented in STEM. But more recently, my inspirations has been the girls in my classroom, because I'm able to translate some of my experiences that I've learned onto them and help shape, the women that I kind of want to envision in a future that's more equal.
Thank you for sharing, Mariam. I think something we learned from your experience is just the fact that you have these variety of interests, these variety of passions, but there is this common thread of wanting to help the women around you, wanting to learn from them, wanting to grow with them, and not wanting to speak for them. So I do think that that's very important for us to take into all stratas of our lives, and make sure that we remember to be empathetic. We remember to take our passions into everything we do rather than leaving them for specific spaces. Khadija, can you tell us a little more about your experience, about how you ended up being an advocate for women's rights? You're an entrepreneur, you empower women to build up their own initiatives, to become sustainably empowering for not just themselves, for them, for the women around them as well. So can you tell us a little?
Okay, first of all, thank you, Khansa. Thank you, US Embassy, for having me today. To be honest, I'm so proud that I made it today to speak from a different perspective. From whenever I have an interview or meetings, they will always call about the inspirational face, what happened to be the woman that you become right now. But there is actually a story that I stand behind. So it's like a build up years of experience, until you see this image right now, sitting and speaking in an official meetings or in interviews. So I started the journey. So this time I'm gonna speak about before the journey starts. When I was 9 years old, I just realized that there is no difference between male and female, to be honest, for me, at least in my small community, in my small house. So I grew in a house that my father and my mother, they treat me and my brother, which is older than me, equally. So when I was deciding to play in the street, my father actually never say no. When I decided to go outside to do whatever I wanted with my brother, he has only one rule, that I always stay with my brother. Because I was the only girls in the family and my brother was the older, so we become a best friend. So it was okay for me to do whatever, unless it is something that culturally and religiously accepted. And culture for my father is something that makes sense, because he actually studied in the US as well. So he has that kind of mentality that women can do whatever she wants if it's match the the basic the basic norm of culture and the Islamic values. So I was doing whatever I wanted as a kid, and I grew in a small society that I thought the whole world around me is reflecting the same. Because I was the only girl, I was actually transferring from one house to the other in my cousin houses, because they have many kids, many girls. So in that time, the phone was created, mobile phones. My dad decided, okay, why not? Let me buy her a phone, so at least I can catch her. And where's she in that day and that time, so I can pick her up, instead of calling all the houses every day to check about on me. So in that time, I realized that I'm different, because the day that my father actually gave me a phone, it's becoming a dilemma in the house. Like everyone, extended family, was speaking about my dad, like how he's so open-minded. I was like, what's wrong? Because I have a phone. They wanted to see, they warned him that your girls will be, like ethically like poisoned, that she was not gonna be the right girls, like you are losing her, khalas, like this is the end of life, goodbye Khadija. So at that moment, I decided like, okay, let's prove to them that I raised well, and okay, I was treated like I'm a normal kid, but I acted like freely with my brother, like I go, I play everywhere, but doesn't mean that if I have a mobile phone, it's gonna be like the end of the world. So after a couple of months, which is around 6 months, my extended family say that I stayed the same. I stayed the same, Khadija, same kids, like polite, shy, but at the same time happy and outgoing, but without any problems. So actually they started buying phones for their girls. So I find the thing in me. I said, okay, why not? Let's be the kind of girl that always, ask for something extra or push the boundaries a little bit and see if I have, like, because I have kind of like a thick skin. So I don't really get bothered by anyone like opinion. I don't know if this is natural or not, but I feel this is normal. So when I try something new, which I feel, because my dad rules, ethically accepted, at the same time, religion, like value accepted in religion. So if that it's like passed through this filter, I'm good. So I tried to do this many, many, many times. Also, another thing, when I was deciding to study in America, it was my like dream come true when my father actually shipped me, because I was studying in UAE, and he's like, no, you work everywhere in the university, so that time I need to actually send you somewhere away, maybe because the language barrier, so you will not do lots of activities in university and you will focus on studying. So he actually shipped me to the US, and he sent me to the like West Coast, so it's like 30 hours a flight. So when I was there, actually the second month I opened a club, a Qatar club, and I opened UNICEF club, and I started doing all the activities in university, and my dad's like, khalas, I lose my mind, she's active all around the world. So in that moment, before I decided to travel, when my like also extended family heard about it, they come to my father's house, and they flew from around the world. And they sit with my father, and like literally it was like a conversation. Everyone sitting with my father and mother, and they convinced them like, you have to stop doing this for your kids. Now this is a cross limit. You are sending her away. That means she is gonna return back, different kid. And this is like a big warning. Like, khalas, she might not be part of the family anymore. So my father said, my girl is growing the same. She's polite, and I know if I put her between 100 the poisoned apples, she'll still be good. We have that in Arabic. I don't know how to translate it, but I hope everyone understands it. So I actually went, and I come back the same. After 6 months, when I went and they did not have any drama, I was not caught in police, or no one called my dad for send me back home, and the embassy did not call my dad. I did a big problem, and they actually see me in the newspaper, and they heard about my achievements in university. I opened UNICEF club, and they contacted me in United Nations, and I actually work with the United Nations and becoming Tara Khadija something good. So the cousin or my extended family, they actually heard about that, and they actually, one of them, they come to my father's house before I travel, like a week before I travel, and he warned them. He actually asked where Khadija study, and he sent his girl to study with me. So in that moment, I decided, and I told my mother like a very, very, very like an honest opinion. I told her what I'm doing. I do 2 filters, which is you learn me from when I'm 9 years old. Religion is number 1, and basic ethical that does not cross the country ethics, like Arab ethics. I stay the same, so I can do whatever I want. And she's like, to be honest, yes, go ahead, because in that moment, before I studied in the US, my mother was literally decided to accept the fact that khalas, let's close Khadija, let's her stay at home, and let's cancel her travel to US. But my father actually pushed her a little bit more, and he said, no, let's believe in her this time. Let's send her and see, maybe this is only, like a chit chat with the family, and then forget about it. And actually that was the truth. And imagine if I did not even go. And after 4 or 5 months, they decided to send their kids, and I lose my my scholarship in the US, and they actually went. So like making it short, from that day, I decided I need to be a role model for my little sister, because now I have a little sister, and now she's not so little. She's studying in Texas A&M, alhamdulillah, and she's leading a couple of clubs just because she saw me as a role model, and she saw how girls in Qatar, they can do more. So
Wow.
for me,
Thank you so much
yeah.
for sharing, Khadija. You absolutely are a role model. And I just really enjoyed listening to your story, because I mean, it shows us that there are certain values that if we value them, we need to stick by them. But then we need to be the trailblazer in our family, and we sort of need to stand up for the girls around us. So thank you so much for sharing. So you are role models in your own right, ladies. You inspire people, and you encourage them to build their dreams. I want to know who inspired you, who helped you build up your dreams. So, Dean Karamanian, can you tell us a little about who your inspiration was growing up, who helped you, or who did you look up to?
Well, it's a bit difficult to follow after Khadijah's amazing observations, because when I was listening to everyone, but listening to her in particular, I wouldn't have answered the question this way when I was younger, but I do think it's my parents. I had parents like Khadijah's who they said, these are the rules, but you're free to develop yourself within these parameters. And if you don't want to do certain things, but you want to be active in sports, or if you want to go play out of the field and run around as opposed to staying indoors and doing certain things, that's up to you. And if the courses that you want to take, where you want to go to university, that's up to you. And to have that sense of self-responsibility at a very young age. But my parents also said, they said, you're going to make a bad decision. There's no question. At some point, you're going to be making a decision because you didn't think it through. You come to us. Now, there'll be some things you're going to be completely accountable for because you overstep the rules. But for others, you need to be able to come to us, and we will talk it through. And so when I reflect on it, particularly after the comments today, I'm thinking to a certain extent my role models were my parents who really let me free to blossom. Yet on the other hand, I do think as a young student and focused on the law, I was always interested in the major civil rights lawyers. The lawyers who took on some of the big cases in the 1960s, 1970s. And that's what inspired me in thinking about their crusades and somebody, and also the people who took stands, like women like Rosa Parks, who I always admired. And fortunately just happened to meet her one day at a picnic in Montgomery, Alabama. But the people who took a stand against something, and to a certain extent, there is the nonconformists, the ones who stood up to authority when something was fundamentally incorrect, and for a large portion of the United States society, what existed when I was growing up in the 1960s and the 1970s was unacceptable. And thinking about having the courage to take those stands, and knowing very well for somebody like Rosa Parks, it meant being arrested and the like to promote social causes. I think later in my life, I have specific women role models. I wouldn't necessarily say there were women role models when I was younger. Looking at my parents, looking at lawyers who I was always amazed at their willingness to what they were doing and how hard they worked. But as I got older, I was fortunate in my law firm to have a woman mentor who it was just an amazing woman who got me involved in lawsuits, working on cases that junior lawyers at many other law firms weren't working on, going to client meetings when I wasn't required to be there, but she felt it important for me to go and meet the client, to have those important relationships. And all of that was, when I reflect on it, very deliberate by her, but I didn't at the time. But I'm grateful for that.
Thank you. It's always a combination. I've noticed even in my own journey, you have your parents who sort of push you, who encourage you to break these boundaries, who encourage you to go for what you want to go for. But then there are these women who you meet when you start working, when you start going to university, and they just help guide you to where you want to be, whether that is by giving advice or whether that is by putting you out there and just hoping that you'll make it out alive. So yeah, I do think it's a combination of both of them. What about you, Wajiha?
So I know it sounds a little bit cliche now because everyone said parents, but honestly, I agree with everyone here that it is very much so your parents at the beginning, because they're the reason that, you know, whether we have a good experience or a bad experience growing up, they're the reason that we do what we do now, and they've shaped our experiences. My parents personally, they always emphasize, so we're 5 children altogether, and 3 of them are boys and 2 of them are girls, and they always emphasized that everyone was equal to each other, and they didn't just say it with their words, they were also they showed it through their actions, and that really helped enforce in me the fact that, hey, it doesn't matter, when I go out into the real world, I am equal to the person standing next to me, no matter where they come from, no matter who they are, no matter what their gender is. That sort of instilled this belief in me that when I'm seeing an injustice happening, whether to me or to another person, it is my duty to speak up and tell them that this is, like, you are equal, and so you deserve just as much as the next person does. And then just like Dr. Susan said, later on during my medical training, some of the people were like women that I met that I came across during, you know, either in the clinic or in the university while they were lecturing. And I'd look at them and I'd be like, wow, you know, one day, maybe in like 20, 30 years from now, I want to be this person. And I want to advocate for anyone who's vulnerable, be that women, be that men, be that children, just like this person is advocating for them. And so I think there's a long list of people who I could thank, but the number one would be the people who started off this journey, which would be my parents.
You know, Wajiha, when I'm listening to you tell me about your story and about what you're passionate about, I can already tell that, you know, 20 years down the lane, 15 years down the lane, you will be perhaps, in fact, you know, in a better position. And I'm sure your students or girls coming to you as patients will look up to you and will want to, you know, aspire to be like you. Mariam, what about you?
Honestly, like, as a student, I think it has to be the people that I get to, like, you know, talk and brainstorm ideas with, especially the girls around me, the women around me, should I say. I feel like with every lived experience of a woman, you have to learn something. Like, there's no way about it. Like, each one comes from a different path, a different journey, and you have to you know, by any means, you're gonna have to pick up some things from their lived experience, and maybe, like me, you're gonna like note that down somewhere in the back of your head. And I think more recently it's been the students in the classroom. For me, like, it's just so exciting to have like almost blank canvases to kind of, you know, with where they come with their experiences and I get to share my experience. And a lot of the times there's a dialogue that happens between us where it's like, you know, we kind of reach a middle ground, or we try to kind of come to terms with the fact that, like, my generation and their generation, even though we're not like far apart, we can come to terms with the fact that there are differences. There's ways that we can make the world a better place. And for me, like, they've recently been my biggest inspirations, to be honest.
You know, I absolutely agree with you. Oftentimes, when people talk about teaching or when people talk about contributing to the community or doing community service, it's always with this lens of what can I give them? but there's a lot that we learn from them, and there's a lot that we learn from just interacting with them, being in the same spaces, listening to their perspectives, listening to their experiences, which is why I absolutely love these panel discussions, because I get to hear from so many different people, and just listen to them, talk to them about their experiences, and learn about things that I never knew of. What about you, Khadija? Who was your biggest inspiration? Who was your biggest support?
Okay, to be honest, when I read the question that you brought, to be honest, I stepped a little bit and I was thinking really what I was, looking up to when I was little. And to be honest, obviously, parents, which is number one, because you grow up and you was built and shaped by your parents, as Wajiha said, as Dr. Suzanne said, and as Mariam touched based on. Also friends, they also playing roles, like connecting ideas, innovative ideas that comes with, conversation that also will shape you in the future. But to be honest, when I read your questions, it gets back to me, there is also a sentence said, like, your name is reflect based on whoever before you use the same name, or like, for example, if your name is Hassan or your name is Khalid and someone Khalid in the past, you have kind of the same personality. When I was like thinking about it, to be honest, I feel that I was inspired by Khadija radiallahu anha, Khadija bint Khuwailid, to be honest, because maybe my name is actually giving me also this hint or idea, but she is also a businesswoman and she was so smart. She's a leading figure. She was like financially stable, like, I don't know, she was based on a solid ground. And I feel I can get in like kind of like the same personality. I don't know her. But what I read in books, I feel like she has that, strong feeling woman that can inspire people around her while before even Islam comes. Yeah. And she can lift also men with her, which is amazing because she also picked her husband and she picked Rasul Muhammad and she actually offered for him, like, so this is also like a strong woman act. So I guess for me, I was inspired by her story when I was little in school. That's why maybe I become inspired to open my business and be a stable woman financially and do that. Because in my family member, we don't like my grandfathers, we do Bisht and we are a Bisht family, like entrepreneurs and businessmen. So this is something in the family. But as a woman figure, we don't have women that actually doing business before. So for me, like maybe leading that position, maybe because I get, I don't know, inspired. And I open my business before all the entrepreneurs, concept in the world become. So I guess I don't know, I've been inspired by a figure that maybe in Islam before.
Thank you for sharing. I think there's something really special about the fact that you were inspired by somebody who shares your name. And, to all the Khadijas who are watching this or who might watch this later, I'm sure this Khadija right here will also be an inspiration for you and will also guide your journey. And obviously, as everyone mentioned, parents have played a very significant role, in just encouraging us to shatter that glass ceiling, and just do our best. Before we move on, let's just give a shout out to all the parents, all our parents, and just their constant encouragement and their constant ability to uplift us. We've learned a little about, how these women have contributed to their own communities and have tried to help other women around them and uplift them. But let's understand, why is it important for us to do this? And how does women's rights activism, how does it help us in bridging these barriers, in helping these communities unify? And why is this kind of activism even important to begin with? Dean Karamanian.
I'd like to at least take the question and maybe challenge it a bit, because I think the question is not just women's rights, it's rights in general. And that's the way I've always approached my work. And it could be that I'm dealing with a situation in which a woman has been threatened by her husband, and she needed to get a restraining order against him. But it could very well be the case that there are other situations in which individual rights are being affected and not necessarily linked to being a woman. And so from my perspective, the most important thing is to have a legal system in place that recognizes equality. Now, I say that from a formal perspective as a lawyer, because I focus on the protection of rights, regardless of gender and regardless of many other factors and the like. But one thing that I can say is that at the same time, I look at almost like a gender neutral approach. There is one area in my life where I felt that it was very important to have a lot of focus on girls and women, and that is in the area of sports. I've been playing sports my whole life, and a lot of that was playing sports with the boys, because we didn't have a lot of women's leagues when I was younger. In the United States, we had a law passed, Title IX, that required equal sports for men and for or boys and girls in school, and then also at higher levels. And that profoundly changed, I think, opportunities for girls and women, because then schools were required to organize. If the men had a tennis team, they would have to have the women's or the girls' tennis team and the like. And it's through, I think, sports that we have seen substantial changes in terms of women being able to have an identity outside of traditional paths, identity outside of the home, independence, the building of camaraderie while being on a team. Of course, the ability then to go on to university for some of the women athletes, whether you're on scholarship or not, but to be on a university team, to travel, to meet athletes from around the world. And I do think in that respect, in my lifetime, I think that's one of the largest changes for that opportunities that didn't exist when I was a young girl that now exist, and I think it's invaluable. The experiences are just invaluable.
So it's really about expanding the way that we think about activism and expanding the way that we think about women's rights and thinking on an overall level about rights and about who we give them to, why we give them, and how we should be giving them. So thank you for encouraging us to sort of expand the way that we look at this entire idea of women's rights activism and just this entire idea of how the question itself was framed. Mariam, can you tell us a little about what you think are some of the challenges faced by women leaders in Qatar and the broader women's rights movement on the whole?
For sure. When you ask that question, two words pop up mainly, which is civil society. I think, like I touched on before, it's really important to kind of have discussions and dialogue amongst other women. I feel like civil society in Qatar and in the Arab world in general, I think it's more profound in places like Kuwait. But in Qatar, I think we lack spaces, we lack, platforms for women to kind of talk and discuss. And I think that's something that my university experience has kind of catapulted me into. But I think something else is, unfortunately, and I think that we can't have this discussion without, like Dr. Susan was talking about, without having touched on, law. And for me personally, I think one standout or something that has kind of stagnated the push forward for women is, unfortunately, colonialism. Because once you realize that the Islamic tradition of lawmaking for the majority of the Arab world was very much discursive. And there's a book by Muhammad Qasim Zaman, I believe, which is called The Ulama in Contemporary Islam, which kind of discusses this idea. And I don't think you can talk about the Arab world without talking about Islamic law, and then how that push has kind of stagnated or perhaps stopped women from kind of achieving their full potential. So given the fact that, you know, a lot of Islamic law traditionally has been very discursive, has been scholars meeting at roundtables, talking about and seeing how the Quranic interpretation can be applied into modern day. With the colonialism that happened in the Arab world, a lot of the times, you know, especially in that book, it mentions how the colonizers would come and they would see some of the lawmaking practices as, you know, insignificant. They wanted them to codify the law. And once they codified the law, it became set in stone. And so then we couldn't apply contemporary thought into Islamic law because it was so rigid and so static, and you couldn't change it. So that's something that we have to overcome. I think, especially as what Dr. Susan was talking about, you know, the fact that it calls like Women's History Month is a reminder. And if you constantly remind people that our oral tradition can't be negated based on the fact that it's oral, it had a lot of value. And if anything, it shows us that traditional Islamic lawmaking techniques weren't traditional at all. You know, the only tradition was that it was constantly revised, constantly reapplied, constantly made to kind of question the norms and applied to a modern society with modern thought. So I think once colonialism happened, unfortunately, a lot of that base for making Islamic law was crumbled. So we have to now adjust to the fact that a lot of our laws are static, and how do we combat that? We have to look back in our history, in our female history, see what scholars were made to think about these things. So yeah.
You know, it's interesting how a lot of the problem that you've pointed out stems from our conceptions of the past and the past itself. And it's sort of upon us to sort of rethink these, reevaluate where we are at, how we sort of got there, and then think about where we can go from there. Khadija, what do you think? What are some of the challenges faced by women leaders here?
Okay, maybe I will not focus on Qatar, to be honest, because I work a lot between time to time. I attended United Nations youth conferences around the world. And by doing that, I actually had like kind of like a broader perspective about what women actually need all around the world. So to be fair is to speak from that, you know, platform to all women around the world. So as someone who is actually active in entrepreneurs, I would love to tackle one thing that might help women right now, and the gap that might close between male and female. It's by adding technology in the pictures. There is lots of women around the world right now, they are lacked of accessing to digital or technology. So if we add, for example, 600 million women by today, give them knowledge about technology, or give them access to mobile phones, as simple as mobile phones, and give them access to application, we're actually gonna get $13 to $18 billion extra in economy, which is as simple as that. We can actually make their life better. And instead of like, you know, doing lots of, you know, charity or aid, let's think kind of like more AI, let's think more into an active way. I guess activism or women activism right now, their big challenge, or to narrow the gap between female and male, is actually to advance women in technology, to give them tools. As I guess Mariam or Wajiha was mentioning regarding COVID, and lots of people, they are laying out of, or maybe Dr. Suzanne, I'm really sorry, I kind of lost the information. But one of you mentioned before when we started that with COVID, we have women, they let out of jobs and they stay home because of there is no nursery and there is no daycare for them. by giving them technology, giving them access to, you know, small mobile phones, they can actually open businesses online. They can start selling. They can still make sure, even if they are, for example, you know, a divorced mom, or they are living alone, or they are the only woman in the family, there is no male to support them. They actually kind of provide food, shelters, and other things, which is empowering women. That, as basic as this, we can raise women equality in that. So give them a basis access, give them an AI, give them technology, give them education. To be honest, when I did my research, there's 1 out of 5 girls actually left without use of technology around the world. And only 11% of the tech startups have a female CEO. So we are beyond even half the world population of, people whose entrepreneurs decided to go into AI and technology. Over 90% of jobs already have a digital component. So girls must have dedicated access and opportunities to create digital technology. So if we narrow that gap, I guess activism toward female, instead of like only speaking about our point of view, like let's doing, for example, equal opportunities for job, or equal opportunities for, you know, salaries. But actually people, some of them, they don't have even job. Some of them, they cannot even ask for a job because they have other responsibilities to feed and shelters. So they can go anywhere. They cannot even leave the house because of the COVID. So small steps, we can actually narrow the gap, and then we can speak about more actively roles for women in the society, and we can narrow the gap between female and male.
So it's really
I hope I answer your questions.
Absolutely. So it's really about creating a more sustainable future by giving
Mhm.
these women the tools that they need to build up a better future for themselves, whether that is through technology, whether that is through education, and whether that is simply through giving them the encouragement that they need. Obviously, there are several causes for why we're at where we're at today, with only 11% of the CEOs
Mhm.
being women, as you pointed out. And one of the reasons for that is gender violence. Wajiha, you've done a lot of work for women who've had to go through this, and in terms of advocating about this issue, in terms of finding societal solutions for this. So can you talk to us a little about your work, and can you talk to us about some of the social solutions that we on a personal level can apply to this?
Sorry, Khansa. Sorry, before Wajih starts, I think Mariam, she has a note. Sorry to interrupt.
I do, and which is kind of really my comment on obviously what Khadija was saying regarding AI and kind of giving women's access to greater outlets that kind of could propel them forward. Perhaps a more radical view of this, and I'm touching on the base that you talked on, which has to do with social reproduction in women, which is them having to kind of always consider their children, or kind of the cost of care that goes into obviously caring for someone else. And what I want to mention is a report I read that was posted on Uruguay, and how they passed this law called the CARE Act, which meant that now it was a government ensuring that every child or every elderly person who was out of work, so the dependent population of Uruguay, was entitled to care. So that meant that if the parents wanted to go to private care, obviously they could do that. But if they could not afford care, the government would have to step in and provide that care for the children or the elderly. And that could really lift so much pressure off women, especially single mothers, a lot of divorcees, etc., that have to bear the brunt of this weight, especially with COVID. Like I don't think there's a more timely manner to kind of discuss this matter. But so I think that's perhaps a more radical intervention that the government could introduce. And I do think that a lot of the family law in Qatar, if it were to be revised, and a lot of modifications can come forward from it, then that could be the biggest step forward for women in this country.
perspective. And obviously, like as we have successes within the movement here, we have our own challenges, and I'm sure that there is a lot that the government is currently doing and will continue to do to sort of remedy the situation, so to say, and find solutions which are sustainable and also lasting. Vijaya, can you talk to us a little about one of the causes for this, which is gender-based violence, and how you think we can sort of solve that on a social level?
Of course. So I'll give you guys a little bit of brief about sort of the work that our student committee did. This was an initiative wholly led by students, medical students. And basically we started off as a human rights committee, and we decided that we thought that one of the topics that wasn't talked about much in Qatar was gender-based violence. And so we wanted to bring awareness to this topic. And so we started off by just leading an awareness campaign through social media initially to sort of just test the waters, see how people respond, and see what kind of questions come up. What we noticed was that we were getting a lot of response, but not just from people telling us that, oh, like, you know, we're learning something new, but also from survivors. We were getting a lot of contact from survivors who were saying that they're going through XYZ, and if we could find a way to help them. And then that's where we started learning. We started learning about what are the processes in place in Qatar to help any survivors or any victims of abuse, and what isn't really there, what doesn't exist. So this was really helpful to sort of tease out what systems are already in place and where can we improve. So some of the things that I could tell you about is that we have, for example, we have one shelter here, which is the Aman shelter. And if, for example, a kid is facing any abuse, you can call the Sidra hotline, and they will try to, you know, get the kid out of that situation and rehabilitate that child. But other than that, there's actually not much. That's about it. That was about two things that I mentioned. And even within these two things, we were facing a lot of problems because we'd refer people to these resources, and these resources would not be sufficient enough. And then the other option is really to call 999 here, I guess, yeah, 999, and report it. But even in that case, this was something that I corroborated as well. If the police go to their house, they'll just really just tell the abuser off and then leave, which doesn't help the situation. It doesn't protect the person who's facing any violence from facing even more intense violence later on. And so we realized that there were a lot of different places where we could improve, but obviously as students, we couldn't just, you know, snap our fingers and everything would be fixed. So we started where we could start. And we thought that one place where we could make an impact is to educate other medical students about what is happening, how we can respond as healthcare workers, as first responders. So especially when someone comes into your clinic, healthcare is a very, very important point of entry to recognize abuse. And so, for example, nurses are usually the first people in contact with anyone who's suffered from abuse, and then healthcare workers are the first people who can recognize it. And so if we know what the signs are, we can then document it, we can report it, we can help comfort people. And so we started holding workshops to help improve that response. We also held a fundraiser to help raise a little bit of money to help support any victims of abuse. And we started getting a conversation going, really. And it made us more aware of our role in society and how we can impact and how we can support others. And it also made us more aware of the resources that are available through the government to us. And I completely agree with Mariam when she mentioned that, you know, if we change some of the family law, we can create a huge impact. Other than that, the other things that we can work on is improving the healthcare worker response, because currently, if you go to Hamad here, they're mandated to report child abuse, but they're mandated to also document any other forms of domestic violence, but they're not mandated to report it to the police, which changes everything, because even if you document it, it won't really do anything unless you're getting the person out of the situation. Other than that, we also need more shelters, and we also need better forms of reporting. One of the things that happened during the pandemic was that the cases of domestic violence rose by over a third, I believe. And so other countries, what they started doing was they started putting up these hidden stands in pharmacies and supermarkets to help any woman who was coming in if she wanted to report any form of abuse. And so these sort of little interventions were really, really life-saving for someone who is stuck at home, just like, you know, Khadija said, and how Mariam said, without a phone. They can't contact anyone if they're in trouble. And so these sort of small interventions can really help. And then the final point that I just want to add is that through this whole experience, I think I myself and the other students that worked on this project really gained a new perspective of the survivor and what they might be feeling, because a lot of times they're in a situation that we can't comprehend at all, and we only read about it on a surface level, but really speaking to them gives us an entirely different perspective, and gives us new ideas on how to approach the matter. So that's about it.
Thank you for sharing, because you guys were students. There is not a lot that you could have done when you first thought of this issue. But the fact is that you had a great impact. And I found out about the work that you do through the social media presence that you guys have, and the manner in which you have sort of made this conversation a part of mainstream discourse. And I think that's really amazing. And I think it's our responsibility to not just carry forward this discourse, but also be aware of the signs that we see around us and help in each of our individual capacity, whatever that might be, whether that is as a healthcare professional, whether that is as a friend, as a counselor, as an employee, as an employer, in any way whatsoever. We've spoken about how we need long-lasting, sustainable change. And one of the avenues that we've identified for that is basically getting proper, lasting legal change. And in the United States of America, while there is a lot that we still need to do to bridge the gap, so to say, there is a lot that has been accomplished. So, Dean Keramanian, can you tell us a little about how the sort of place where the movement is at in the United States, how that has translated to the rest of the world, and how that sort of has helped build up this cause for women empowerment, around the world, and also just generally in Qatar as well?
Yeah, I could speak about the United States and attempt to try to explain how this has been affected throughout the world. But to a certain extent, it really addresses what Wajiza was saying about this gap. And for example, in the United States, we have a very active bar association in all the major communities. And within each bar association, there invariably are lawyers who are volunteer lawyers to deal with a variety of problems. Through our also, we have a federal legal services entity which works with the local bar associations to support pro bono efforts to deal with, for example, if you wanted to set up a legal arm to the work that Wajia is doing, to have sort of like a clinic, you could get active practicing lawyers to say, now we are going to work with the children, the women who have been documented by doctors of having been abused, and the like. And we do have reporting requirements to the police. One other important constituency for reporting would be teachers. In the United States, our teachers as well are very active in observing their students and seeing if there's something that requires reporting. But we have a tradition of service with the lawyers, but it's also highly organized and highly structured. And so in law schools, we have legal clinics, and women's rights clinics are very, very popular, and ways in which law students working with qualified lawyers can help people, who are in vulnerable situations. That tradition, and I don't want to say it's unique to the United States, but it has spurred activity throughout the world in terms of having clinical education as part and parcel of legal training, so that law students are able to work on cases under the supervision of a licensed lawyer. And we've seen clinics develop around the world outside of the United States. And the clinics are also involved in legal reform efforts. And so getting back to Miriam's observation, I mean, I'm taking away from this panel discussion today a number of ideas that we can have a conversation here with my colleagues and the students, but also about clinics that take on cases, but also some clinics may take on developing reform in family law, for example. Yeah.
So the idea is you create a mechanism which is legally entrenched, but then it is also sort of on a grassroots level, understood by the civil society, understood by your teachers, by your students, and everyone sort of works together to make sure that that law is upheld and that it is maintained in whatever capacity that they can help ensure it.
Well, I think, yeah, because if I could just interrupt on that one, I think the most important thing is to have a sense of where should the law be? Where are we? Where should the law be? And then to determine what is the best way to get there. And that's a big engagement. That's an engagement. We heard about some of the, perhaps the actors who are out there. They need to be part of this system as well. And it's not just, you can do it alone. You can do test cases, but then you may find out that you're facing a barrier that is just too much of a hurdle to get over. We had test cases, of course, in the United States, but we had judges who risked lives to make some very important rulings. So
it's really about making that entire process inclusive of who you're trying to protect, basically. So before we move on, and I want to be cognizant of the time here, and I can't believe that it's passed so quickly. I'm not even halfway through all the things I wanted to discuss with our panelists. But before we conclude, let's just hear a little more before we give our audience the chance to ask the panelists questions. Wajiha, do you have any last messages for our audience, for all those who might be listening to you?
Really just one thing. I think that a lot of times being an activist can be tiring. And it's something that I've experienced. It's really hard to be 100% on all the time and 100% paying attention to the news, and there can be a little bit of compassion fatigue. And so I guess I want to say is that whatever little amount you do is okay. It's even being 10% on is good enough. It's better than nothing, and it's what is going to get us to make changes. That's about it.
I think that's so important. You have to just keep on going, because every little bit that you think might not have an impact has an impact. Mariam, what about you?
Yeah, I do kind of want to reiterate Wajiha's point. It's not an all or nothing game. And, some people think of the term activist as like, your Greta Thunbergs, etc. But really, you can be an activist in your everyday life. You can challenge discussions in your family. You can challenge discussions with your friends. You can ask questions. You can get people to think in a different way. So really, every little bit that you do does add up and does help.
Absolutely. So, whenever you have these opportunities in your everyday life, whether that is you having conversations with your friends or helping someone in whatever capacity that you can, go ahead and give your best. Khadija.
Okay, to be honest, Wajiha and Mariam, steal it. I was literally planning to say consistent. So in business, because I am all about business and youth activist things, that's also reflecting women and gender equality. But to be really based on a concrete background, consistency in everything will work. So at the end, if you did not do, if you are not doing it every day, within a couple of months, you will not achieve nothing. So small steps every day, you change the people around you, you change your habit, you change the society, you change also, you know, your environment. This will lead on something and the right answer. I might also need to add one thing. I hope women become easy on other women, because to be honest, we all here standing out for one, let's say, you know, goal, which is women rights. But at the same time, when it's come to work, when it's come to, you know, everyday life, actually in reality, the biggest challenge for women on reality is other women's. You'll see women, if they are like in a leading position, sometimes they will not accept women under her to be, you know, challenging her more. So they will actually accepting male to challenge her, but women, they will, you know, they will not give them more chances. So maybe also there is a phrase like woman is the biggest enemy for women is women. So sometimes we need just to change that and start to look at the, you know, outcome of the pictures. It's a bigger picture, and let's help each other. Let's raise each other. And one extra thing, like to be on the top, it's not only for one person. You can be on the leading figure on the top from different aspects. Not everyone will be an entrepreneur. Like there is not only one chair as an entrepreneur. There is not only one chair as a doctor. There is not only one chair as a student. We can all have number one, because the mountain is not, you know, pointed, it's a flat. So we can be all number one, and we can all share the success with each other. Thank you.
So let's learn to become allies for one another in whatever capacity that we want, because we're not hindrances for one another. We're there to build up each other. We're there to inspire each other, and we're there to pave these paths for one another. So thank you so much, ladies, for sharing your perspectives, for sharing your stories. I have so many more things to ask, but before we finish this panel discussion, let's give our this opportunity to our audience to engage with us, to ask questions, to tell us about their experiences, and to help us learn from them. So our audience, the floor is now yours. Ms. Cecile, do we have any questions?
Yes, so there is a question to Wajiha. So what efforts are the new generation of doctors like yourself are undertaking to halt obstetric violence?
Wajiha, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for this question. This is actually a topic that, I'll be very honest, we haven't talked much about in medical school, but I think I'm very glad that you brought it up. So essentially, just a recap on obstetric violence, it's basically any violence that has been inflicted on a woman who is pregnant by healthcare personnel or anyone in the healthcare field. And some of the things that we, the new generation, are doing to try to avoid this is really just humanizing birth and making it a more patient-centered care. So it is around the woman's choices. And so we're making sure now that the woman's wants and wishes are heard and respected over the wants and wishes of the hospital system. And so some of the trends that we've seen recently with the industrialization of medicine is that a lot of times birth has become more of a thing to make money out of, really. And so women are pressurized to do things that they don't want to do while being pregnant. And that is very, quote unquote, uncool. And so we at the new generation are really, really focusing on making sure that the rights are respected and that the care that is delivered to them before delivery, after delivery is ensuring that they are, you know, they are getting exactly what they want. And we hope that that change will slowly change the trend of industrialization that has taken place.
Thank you so much. Ms. Cecile, do we have more questions?
No, this is the only question. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today, for taking time out of your busy schedules. I hope that we can bring you back here again with more questions and with more conversations like these, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
very much.
for your valuable
you.
contributions. Thanks a lot.